Chapter 4. In Sicily this September of 1943, people could only exist by trading in the black market. Strict rationing of foodstuffs still carried over from the war, and farmers had to turn in their produce to central government storehouses at fixed prices and for paper money that was almost worthless. In turn, the government was supposed to sell and distribute these foodstuffs at low prices to the people. Under this system, everybody would get enough to remain alive. In reality, the farmers hid what they could because what they turned in to the government storehouses was appropriated by Don Croce Mallo and his mayors to be sold on the black market. The people themselves then had to buy on the black market and break smuggling laws merely to exist. If they were caught doing this, they were prosecuted and sent to jail. What good was it that a democratic government had been established in Rome? They would be able to vote as they starved. Turi Guiliano and Aspanu Pisciotta, with the lightest of hearts, were in the process of breaking these laws. It was Pisciotta who had all the black market contacts and who had arranged this affair. He had contracted with a farmer to smuggle a great wheel of cheese from the countryside to a black market dealer in Montelepre. Their pay for this would be 4 smoked hams and a basket of sausage, which would make his sister's engagement party a great celebration. They were breaking 2 laws, one forbidding dealing in the black market, the other smuggling from one province of Italy to another. There was not much the authorities could do to enforce the black market laws. They would have to jail everyone in Sicily. But smuggling was another matter. Patrols of national police, the carabinieri, roamed the countryside, set up roadblocks, paid informers. They could not, of course, interfere with the caravans of Don Croce Mallo, who used American army trucks and special military government passes. But they could net many of the small farmers and starving villagers. It took them 4 hours to get to the farm. Guiliano and Pisciotta picked up the huge grainy white cheese and the other goods and strapped them onto the donkey. They formed a camouflage of sisal grass and bamboo stalks over the goods so that it would appear they were merely bringing in fodder for livestock kept in the households of many villagers. They had the carelessness and confidence of youth, of children really, who hide treasures from their parents, as if the intention to deceive were enough. Their confidence came, too, from the knowledge that they could find hidden paths through the mountains. As they set out for the long journey home, Guiliano sent Pisciotta ahead to scout for the carabinieri. They had arranged a set of whistling signals to warn of danger. The donkey carried the cheeses easily and behaved amiably. He had had his reward before setting out. They journeyed for 2 hours, slowly ascending, before there was any sign of danger. Then Guiliano saw behind them, perhaps 3 miles away, following their path, a caravan of 6 mules and a man on horseback. If the path was known to others in the black market, it could have been marked by the field police for a roadblock. As a caution, he sent Pisciotta scouting far ahead. After an hour he caught up with Aspanu, who was sitting on a huge stone smoking a cigarette and coughing. Aspanu looked pale. He should not have been smoking. Turi Guiliano sat down beside him to rest. One of their strongest bonds since childhood was that they never tried to command each other in any way, so Turi said nothing. Finally, Aspanu stubbed out the cigarette and put the blackened butt into his pocket. They started walking again, Guiliano holding the donkey's bridle, Aspanu walking behind. They were traveling a mountain path that bypassed the roads and little villages, but sometimes they saw an ancient Greek water cistern that spouted water through a crumpled statue's mouth, or remains of a Norman castle that many centuries ago had barred this way to invaders. Again, Turi Guiliano dreamed of Sicily's past and its future. He thought of his godfather, Hector Adonis, who had promised to come after the Festa and prepare his application to the University of Palermo. And when he thought of his godfather, he felt momentary sadness. Hector Adonis never came to the Festas. The drunken men would make fun of his short stature. The children, some of them taller than he, would offer him some insult. Turi wondered about God stunting the growth of a man's body and bursting his brain with knowledge. For Turi thought Hector Adonis the most brilliant man in the world and loved him for the kindness he had showed him and his parents. He thought of his father working so hard on their small piece of land, and of his sisters with their threadbare clothes. It was lucky that Maria Nina was so beautiful that she had caught a husband despite her poverty and the unsettled times. But most of all he anguished over his mother, Maria Lombardo. Even as a child he had recognized her bitterness, her unhappiness. She had tasted the rich fruits of America and could no longer be happy in the poverty-stricken towns of Sicily. His father would tell the tales of the glorious days and his mother would burst into tears. But he would change his family's fortune, Turi Guiliano thought. He would work hard and study hard and he would become as great a man as his godfather. Suddenly they were passing through a strand of trees, a small forest, one of the few left in this part of Sicily, which now seemed to grow only the great white stones in marble quarries. On the other side of the mountain they would begin to descend into Montelepre and would have to be careful on the roving patrols of the national police, the carabinieri. But now they were coming to the Quattro Molin, the four crossroads, and it would pay to be a little careful here too. Guiliano pulled on the donkey's bridle and motioned Aspanu to halt. They stood there quietly. No strange sound could be heard, only the steady hum of the countless insects that swarmed over the ground, their whirring wings and legs buzzing like a far-distant saw. They moved forward over the crossroads and then safely out of sight into another small forest. Turi Guiliano started to daydream again. The trees widened out suddenly, as if they had been pushed back, and they were picking their way across a small clearing with a rough floor of tiny stones, cropped bamboo stalks, thin balding grass. The late afternoon sun was falling far away from them and looked pale and cold above granite-studded mountains. Past this clearing the path would begin to drop in a long, winding spiral to the town of Montelepre. Suddenly Guiliano came out of his dreams. A flash of light, like the striking of a match, lanced his left eye. He jerked the donkey to a halt and held up his hand to Aspanu. Only 30 yards away, strange men stepped out from behind a thicket. There were 3 of them, and Turi Guiliano saw their stiff black military caps, the black uniforms with white piping. He felt the sick, foolish feeling of despair, of shame, that he had been caught. The 3 men fanned out as they advanced, weapons at the ready. 2 were quite young, with ruddy shiny faces and crusted military caps tilted almost comically to the backs of their heads. They seemed earnest yet gleeful as they pointed their machine pistols. The carabinieri in the center was older and held a rifle. His face was pockmarked and scarred, and his cap was pulled firmly over his eyes. He had sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. The flash of light Guiliano had seen was a sunbeam drawn by a steel rifle barrel. This man was smiling grimly, his rifle pointed unwaveringly at Guiliano's chest. Guiliano's despair turned to anger at that smile. The sergeant with the rifle stepped closer, his 2 fellow guards closing in from either side. Now Turi Guiliano was alert. The 2 young carabinieri with their machine pistols were not so much to be feared. They were carelessly approaching the donkey, not taking their prisoners seriously. They motioned Guiliano and Pisciotta away from the donkey, and one of them let his pistol sway back on its sling as he stripped the camouflage bamboo from the donkey's back. When he saw the goods, he let out a whistle of greedy delight. He didn't notice Aspanu edging closer to him, but the sergeant with the rifle did. He shouted, "You, with the mustache, move away!" And Aspanu stepped back closer to Turi Guiliano. The sergeant moved a little closer. Guiliano watched him intently. The pock-marked face seemed to be fatigued, but the man's eyes gleamed when he said, "Well, young fellows, that's a nice bit of cheese. We could use it in our barracks to go with our macaroni. So just tell us the name of the farmer you got it from and we'll let you ride your donkey back home." They did not answer him. He waited. Still they did not answer. Finally, Giuliano said quietly, "I have 1,000 lire as a gift if you let us go." "You can wipe your ass with lire," the sergeant said. "Now, your identity papers. If they're not in order, I'll make you shit and wipe your ass with them too." The insolence of the words, the insolence of those black and white piped uniforms, aroused an icy fury in Giuliano. At that moment he knew he would never allow himself to be arrested, never allow these men to rob him of his family's food. Turi Guiliano took out his identity card and started to approach the sergeant. He was hoping to get under the arc of the pointed rifle. He knew his physical coordination was faster than that of most men and he was willing to gamble on it. But the rifle motioned back. The man said, "Throw it on the ground." Giuliano did so. Pisciotta, 5 paces on Giuliano's left, and knowing what was in his friend's mind, knowing he carried the pistol under his shirt, tried to distract the sergeant's attention. He said with studied insolence, his body thrust forward, hand on hip touching the knife he carried in a sheath strapped to his back, "Sergeant, if we give you the farmer's name, why do you need our identity cards? A bargain's a bargain." He paused for a moment and said sarcastically, "We know a carabinieri always keeps his word." He spat out the word carabinieri with hatred. The rifleman sauntered a few steps toward Pisciotta. He stopped. He smiled and leveled his gun. He said, "And you, my little dandy, your card? Or do you have no papers, like your donkey, who has a better mustache than you?" The younger policeman laughed. Pisciotta's eyes glittered. He took a step toward the sergeant. "No, I have no papers, and I know no farmer. We found these goods lying in the road." The very foolhardiness of this defiance defeated its purpose. Pisciotta had wanted the rifleman to move closer within striking distance, but now the sergeant took a few steps backward and smiled again. He said, "The bastinado will knock out some of your Sicilian insolence." He paused for a moment and then said, "Both of you, lie on the ground." The bastinado was a term loosely used for the physical beating with whips and clubs. Giuliano knew some citizens of Montelepre who had been punished in the Belampo barracks. They had returned to their homes with broken knees, heads swollen as big as melons, their insides injured so that they could never work again. The carabinieri would never do that to him. Giuliano went to one knee as if he were going to lie down, put one hand on the ground and the other on his belt so that he could draw the pistol from beneath his shirt. The clearing was now bathed with the soft hazy light of beginning twilight. The sun far over the trees had dipped below the last mountain. He saw Pisciotta standing proudly, refusing the command. Surely they would not shoot him down over a piece of smuggled cheese. He could see the pistols trembling in the hands of the young guards. At that moment there was a braying of mules and the clatter of hooves from behind, and bursting into the clearing came the caravan of mules that Giuliano had spotted on the road behind him that afternoon. The man on horseback leading it carried a lupara slung over his shoulder and looked huge in a heavy leather jacket. He jumped off his horse and took a great wad of lira notes from one of his pockets and said to the carabinieri with the rifle, "So, you've scooped up a few little sardines this time." They obviously knew each other. For the first time the rifleman relaxed his vigilance to accept the money offered to him. The two men were grinning at each other. The prisoner seemed to have been forgotten by everyone. Turi Guiliano moved slowly toward the nearest guard. Pisciotta was edging toward the nearest bamboo thicket. The guards didn't notice. Giuliano hit the nearest guard with his forearm, knocking him to the ground. He shouted to Pisciotta, "Run!" Pisciotta dove into the bamboo thicket and Giuliano ran to the trees. The remaining guard was too stunned or too inept to bring his pistol around in time. Giuliano, about to plunge into the shelter of the forest, felt a quick sense of exultation. He launched his body into mid-air to dive between two sturdy trees that would shield him. As he did so, he drew the pistol free from beneath his shirt. But he had been right about the rifleman being the most dangerous. The sergeant dropped a wad of money to the ground, swung his rifle up, and very coolly shot. There was no mistaking the hit. Giuliano's body dropped like a dead bird. Giuliano heard the shot at the same time he felt his body racked with pain, as if he had been hit with a giant club. He had landed on the ground between the two trees and tried to get up, but could not. His legs were numb. He could not make them move. Pistol in hand, he twisted his body and saw the sergeant shake his rifle in the air in triumph. And then Giuliano felt his trousers filling with blood, the liquid warm and sticky. In the fraction of a second before he pulled the trigger of his pistol, Turi Guiliano felt only astonishment that they had shot him over a piece of cheese, that they had smashed the fabric of his family with such a cruel carelessness just because he was running away from such a small breaking of law that everyone broke. His mother would weep to the end of her days, and now his body was awash in blood, he who had never done anyone any harm. He pulled the trigger and saw the rifle fall, saw the sergeant's black cap with its white piping seem to fly in the air as the body with its mortal head wound crumpled and floated to the rock-filled earth. It was an impossible shot with a pistol at the range, but it seemed to Giuliano that his own hand had traveled with the bullet and smashed it like a dagger through the sergeant's eye. A machine pistol began to pop, but the bullets flew upward in harmless arcs, chattering like small birds. And then it was deadly still. Even the insects had stopped their incessant whirring. Turi Guiliano rolled into the bushes. He had seen the enemy's face shatter into a mask of blood, and that gave him hope. He was not powerless. He tried to get up again, and this time his legs obeyed him. He began to run, but only one leg sprang forward. The other dragged along the ground, which surprised him. His crotch was warm and sticky, his trousers soaked, his vision cloudy. When he ran through a sudden patch of light, he was afraid he had circled back into the clearing again and tried to turn back. His body started to fall, not to the ground, but into an endless red-tinted black void, and then he knew he was falling forever. In the clearing, the young guard took his hand off the trigger of his machine pistol and the chattering stopped. The smuggler rose from the ground with the huge wad of money in his hand and offered it to the other guard. The guard pointed his machine pistol at him and said, "You're under arrest." The smuggler said, "You only have to split it 2 ways now. Let me go on." The guards looked down at the fallen sergeant. There was no doubt he was dead. The bullet had smashed his eye and socket to pieces, and the wound was bubbling with a yellow liquid in which a gecko was already dipping its feelers. The smuggler said, "I'll go into the bushes after him. He's hurt. I'll bring back his carcass and you two will be heroes. Just let me go." The other guard picked up the identity card Turi had thrown down on the ground at the sergeant's command. He read it out loud. "Salvatore Giuliano, the town of Montelepre." "No need to look for him now," the other said. "We'll report back to headquarters. That's more important." "Cowards," the smuggler said. He thought for a moment of unslinging his lupara, but saw that they were looking at him with hatred. He had insulted them. For that insult, they made him load the sergeant's body onto his horse and made him walk back to their barracks. Before that, they had relieved him of his weapon. They were very skittish, and he hoped they would not shoot him by mistake out of sheer nervousness. Aside from that, he was not too concerned. He knew Maricialo Roccofino of Montelepre very well. They had done business before, and they would do business again. In all that time, not one of them had given a thought to Pisciotta, but he had heard everything they had said. He was lying in a deep grassy hollow, knife drawn. He was waiting for them to try hunting down Turi Guiliano. and he planned to ambush one of them and get his gun after he had cut his throat. There was a ferocity in his soul that banished all fear of death, and when he heard the smuggler offer to bring back Turi's carcass, he burned that man's face forever in his brain. He was almost sorry they retreated to leave him alone on the mountainside. He felt the pang when they tied his donkey to the end of the mule train, but he knew that Turi was badly wounded and would need help. He circled around the clearing, running through the woods to get to the side where his comrade had disappeared. There was no sign of a body in the underbush, and he started to run down the path from which they had come. There were still no signs until he climbed over a huge granite boulder whose top shallowed out into a small basin. In that basin of rock was a small pool of almost black blood, and the other side of the rock was smeared with long, ropey gouts of blood that were bright red. He kept running and was caught by surprise when he saw Guiliano's body sprawled across his path, the deadly pistol still clutched in his hand. He knelt and took the pistol and thrust it into his belt. At that moment Turi Guiliano's eyes opened. The eyes were alive with an awesome hatred, but they were staring past Aspanu Pisciotta. Pisciotta almost wept with relief and tried to get him to his feet, but he was not strong enough. "Turi, try to get up. I'll help you," Pisciotta said. Guiliano pushed his hands against the earth and raised his body. Pisciotta put an arm around his waist and his hand became warm and wet. He jerked his hand away and pulled aside Guiliano's shirt, and with horror he saw the huge gaping hole in Guiliano's side. He propped Guiliano up against a tree, ripped off his own shirt and shoved it into the hole to staunch the blood, tying the sleeves together around the waist. He put one arm around his friend's middle, and then with his free hand took Guiliano's left hand and raised it high in the air. This balanced them both as he guided Guiliano down the path with careful, mincing steps. From a distance it looked as if they were dancing together down the mountain. And so Turi Guiliano missed the Festa of Saint Rosalie, which the citizens of Montelepre hoped would bring a miracle to their town. He missed the shooting contest which he surely would have won. He missed the horse races in which the jockeys hit opposing riders over the head with clubs and whips. He missed the purple, yellow, and green rockets that exploded and tattooed the star-filled sky. He never tasted the magical sweets made of almond paste molded into the form of carrots, bamboo stalks, and red tomatoes, all so sweet they numbed your entire body, or the spun sugar figures of the puppet knights of mythical romance, of Roland, Oliver, and Charlemagne, their sugar swords studded with peppermints of ruby, emeralds of tiny fruit bits that the children brought home to bed to dream over before they went to sleep. At home his sister's engagement party went on without him. The mating of the donkey and the miracle mule failed. There was no offspring. The citizens of Montelepre were disappointed. They did not know until years later that the festa had produced its miracle in the person of the young man who had held the donkey.